Hello, everybody. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to travel through time? I have, and for my first journey, I would choose to visit Puyi, the last emperor of China. I sought help from my friend AI on this journey, as I'm completely unfamiliar with the etiquette of the Chinese imperial court. Who could I be to receive an invitation for an audience with Emperor Puyi in the year 1915? Emperors did not invite just anyone, so to be received by the Chinese emperor, I would have to be a person of significance. Perhaps a European aristocrat visiting China, a foreigner serving the emperor, since emperors often employed foreign experts such as doctors, painters, and architects. To a woman held a little political power, some teachers and educated women had exceptional status. I could be a daughter of a high-ranking mandarin, a member of the imperial family, or a young beauty chosen as a potential concubine. Maybe I am a Confucian scholar teaching the emperor, a calligrapher, historian, or poet, since emperors highly valued art and philosophy. I could be an advisor on various topics such as astronomy, philosophy, or military strategy, a Buddhist or Taoist monk, as emperors often consulted them for fate predictions. Or perhaps I'm a traditional Chinese medicine doctor or herbalist treating the emperor and his concubines. I could even be a craftsman and artist painting the emperor's portrait, a foreign diplomat or merchant. To stay true to myself, I have chosen to be European, a European painter commissioned to paint the emperor's portrait. To achieve this, I would need to be a highly esteemed portraitist of the European royal courts. The emperor might have heard of me through diplomatic circles, recommendations from European aristocrats, art and trade, or Chinese nobles. And so, I became Florence Davenport, a renowned English artist honored with the opportunity to paint Emperor Puyi. The journey begins. In 1915, Emperor Puyi was just 9 years old and still sat on the throne, though he no longer held any real power. He remained secluded within the Forbidden City, surrounded by eunuchs, concubines, mandarins, and court ladies. Foreigners were only permitted inside the Forbidden City under strict conditions, so I had to be accompanied. At this time, Puyi was still too young for formal English education and remained under the strong influence of Chinese advisors and eunuchs who sought to preserve the traditional imperial system. Western influence had already begun to seep in, but his education was still tightly controlled by the court. It wasn't until 1919, at the age of 13, that Puyi was assigned a Western tutor, Reginald Johnston, a Scottish scholar and British diplomat. Fascinated by Chinese culture, Johnston later wrote Twilight in the Forbidden City, a memoir of his time with the emperor. Puyi admired and respected Johnston deeply, one of the very few people he truly listened to. But in 1915, when I was granted an audience, Puyi was still a young boy, shaped entirely by the imperial court. I was accompanied by a Chinese official fluent in English and eunuch who was also spoke English. They led me through the grand corridors of the palace to the hall where the young emperor would receive me. The Forbidden City house multiplied audience halls, each serving different ceremonial purposes. Given that Puyi was still a child, it was likely that he would receive me in a smaller, less formal hall rather than the grand ones used for state affairs. Perhaps it would be Hall of Supreme Harmony, or Hall of Harmonious Union, or even his personal chamber in the Palace on Heavenly Purity. I found myself waiting in the reception hall near the Hall of Harmonious Union. In my hands I held my elegant hat. It was considered impolite to wear a hat indoors. I quietly repeated to myself the strict imperial protocol: bow before the emperor. Foreigners were not required to perform the full Chinese kowtow, kneeling and touching the forehead to the ground 3 times, but at very least I had to offer a slight bow. Do not rise before he does. If Puyi stood, I could not stand first. Do not speak unless permitted. I had to wait for the eunuch or advisor to address me. Keep my hands gently folded. Excessive gestures were considered impolite. Do not approach too closely. I was a guest, but still a foreigner. The moment had arrived. The grand doors of the Hall of Harmonious Union swung open, and I stepped into a magnificent chamber. Towering red columns, adorned with golden dragons, stretched toward the high ceiling. Silk draperies swayed gently, stirred by an unseen breeze, while lanterns cast a soft golden glow across the vast hall. The polished marble floor mirrored the intricate ceiling patterns, creating an ethereal illusion, as if the very air shimmered with history. At the far end of the hall, seated upon a raised golden throne beneath a regal canopy, was the young Emperor Puyi. His resplendent yellow robes, the sacred color of sun and heaven, draped around his small frame, a symbol of his divine status. The air was heavy with the rich scent of incense curling in delicate tendrils toward the ceiling. Mandarins, eunuchs, and servants stood in perfect silence, their eyes upon me, their expressions unreadable. I felt the weight of the moment settle upon me, a mix of nervous anticipation and quiet awe. I knew with absolute certainty that this was to be one of the most significant moments of my life. I was not seated directly across from him like a diplomat, but positioned carefully within his direct line of sight, 2 or 3 meters from the throne, close enough for him to observe my expressions, yet still maintaining the expected decorum. The 9-year-old emperor sat upon his grand golden throne, nestled beneath a richly decorated canopy. His yellow imperial robe, embroidered with intricate dragons, marked his divine status. His face was youthful, yet serious, his dark eyes filled with curiosity and quiet observation. His small hands rested on the carved armrests, his posture composed, as if rehearsing the bite of power. Though he was still just a child, he tried, with all the discipline expected of an emperor, to maintain the solemn demeanor of a ruler. Following strict court protocol, the mandarin was the first to speak. Your Majesty, this distinguished lady is Florence Davenport, an artist from Britain. She has come to honor your Majesty with her art and to create your portrait, should your Majesty desire it. Puyi responded coldly, without enthusiasm. Proceed. He seemed frustrated with his duty, detached from the moment. I bowed slightly and replied with quiet reverence. Your Majesty, it is an honor to create your portrait. I hope my work will capture your greatness and wisdom. I will strive to make this painting worthy of your Majesty. The eunuch nodded, a silent command that the audience would proceed. I could begin my first sketches. After half an hour, I began to notice Puyi's growing impatience. His gaze drifted unfocused, his small fingers idly tracing the embroidered edge of his sleeve. He was just a child, forced to sit in silence. Then a subtle cough from the eunuch, soft, almost imperceptible, yet unmistakable. It was time to stop. The eunuch presented my sketch to the Emperor. Puyi glanced at it, his expression unreadable. A brief silence. Then the eunuch spoke. Your Majesty appreciates your effort today. The audience is concluded. There was no criticism, no approval, only silence and formality. Yet I understood perfectly. My services were no longer needed. As I prepared to leave, the eunuch raised a hand. Servants appeared carrying a delicate porcelain cup of tea. The mandarin bowed slightly and said, "A farewell gift, Miss Davenport." Even though the Emperor had lost interest in my portrait, they could not simply dismiss me without a gesture of courtesy. Offering tea was a sign of respect, though it did not imply favor. Presenting fruit symbolized prosperity and happiness, a way for me to carry away good energy, even though I was no longer welcome at court. I only needed to lift the cup symbolically, take a gentle sip, and place it back on the table. To refuse would have been impolite. I also took a single mandarin. The mandarin official gestured that I could take more, but I knew better. With a polite smile and a humble, "Thank you, this is enough," I declined. The teacup was exquisite, smooth, delicate, and without a handle. The Chinese did not use handles because they held the cup with both hands, a gesture of respect and attentiveness. They felt the tea's warmth through the porcelain. If the cup was too hot to hold, it meant the tea was not yet ready to drink. As the aesthetic and simplicity, the cup were elegant, minimalist, and often adorned with intricate patterns. It was green tea, the most common and revered tea in the Imperial court. Fresh, delicate, slightly grassy, a symbol of purity and longevity. Then the Emperor rose, a silent signal. The eunuch turned to me, his subtle gesture unmistakable. It was time for me to leave. I stepped out of the palace, and suddenly the world shifted. I was back in London, Nestled in my favorite cafe on Cecil Court, the scent of black tea and lemon curling through the air. Before me lay my sketch, not quite a portrait of an emperor, but the delicate likeness of a 9-year-old Chinese boy. Outside, raindrops traced silent rivers down the window pane. The city hummed around me, indifferent, unchanged. And then, through the blurred glass, I saw him, a 9-year-old Chinese boy, dressed in ripped jeans and a simple t-shirt, his smile bright, his eyes knowing. He was walking toward me. Could it be him?